Have you ever heard the sound of freedom? Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
You're listening to The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak, connecting the reality of the gospel to the grit of life. You can support the podcast and pick up some sweet Flipside swag at www.patreon.com/NoahFilipiak.
What is up, Flipaponami? Welcome to episode 121 of the Flipside podcast. As always, brought to you by Angry Brew. Head over to fivelakes.com, angrybrew.com. Get 10% off your order of coffee with a punch using promo code FLIP. Also, shout out to Patreon supporters. Thank you for making this podcast possible. And I look forward to interacting with each of you on our Patreon channel with an exclusive blog after this episode and all long-form episodes for more interaction. Today, I want to talk to you, just me today, about premarital sex before marriage. This is something I talk about in my books Beyond the Battle, which is a book for men, as well as Needed Navigation, a book for teen guys and girls. And there is definitely a pendulum in the church, as happens with so many things, particularly with my generation. This pendulum, oh man, we could go down the line, but just speaking here, you may have heard about purity culture. I did an episode on Unpacking purity culture at one point a couple years ago that you can dive into that more. But I know even mentioning the term premarital sex, it can often sound silly. It can sound corny. It can sound outdated. It's not something that in a lot of church settings is talked about anymore. And I think many think they just kind of lump it in to the purity culture movement and sort of move on. And so I want to just kind of pump the brakes on that. I want to look at God's design for sex, and particularly for those here listening or watching that are unmarried, whether you're divorced and single in that sense, and or you're single and have never been married. Certainly in our culture, it has become incredibly normal to have sex outside of marriage. I don't have the stats in front of me. I've used stats before from Match.com's Singles in America, I believe it's called, survey. I've put some of those in Beyond the Battle. The stats, they're out of this world, right? The promiscuity that's normal. There's something called interview sex now that a large majority of singles, I shouldn't say majority, I'm sorry, a large percentage of singles say that they participate in, and that would be sex before your first date. Sex is seen as a handshake in these sort of settings. Well, that may not be you. That may not be your lifestyle. I bring that up to say that the normalization of sex outside of marriage has taken over the church as well, particularly if whether your church is talking about it or not. I think it's easy to roll your eyes if you're a single in this culture, particularly if you're not someone who's, I don't know, maybe super committed to what the Bible has to say about sex when it comes to, look, I'm going to follow the Bible about sex versus, yeah, I like that part of the Bible. I like that part of Jesus, but I'm going to kind of do what feels natural or normal over here. And so I want to make a case today for you to consider about sex before marriage, some from the Bible, some from some research and what we see in society, some of the why behind God's design this way. I want to remind you that as followers of Jesus, our citizenship is not of this world. It is in heaven. It is in the kingdom of Jesus with Jesus as our king. We are not to conform to the patterns of this world. Romans 12, 1-2. We're to be transformed, the renewing of our mind, to God's patterns and to his ways. So it is okay to be different than the world, to not do what is normal in the world. Not only is it okay, it's required. It's part of what it means to follow Jesus. So I think that's an important distinction to be reminded of versus what's becoming more and more popular of just adding Jesus onto what we already consider normal, which isn't all that different than in the Old Testament where they would add God, Yahweh, onto what was already normal with Baal or other household gods. But I'm getting sidetracked, so let me get back to the point. Let me start with this concept of one flesh, and it is a concept that we see early on in the creation account, God's design for humanity before sin enters the world. Genesis 2:24. The second chapter of the Bible, he says, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. This one flesh concept is then quoted 4 other times in the New Testament by Jesus and by Paul. Jesus references it in Matthew 19 and Mark 10 when he's in a debate about divorce, and he is giving the biblical design for sex within marriage only that, and he literally just quotes Genesis 2:24 again, that two become one, they become one flesh. They're no longer two, but one flesh, and says, therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate. You may have heard that line at a wedding before. What you're going to see in these New Testament texts is it's very clear he's not talking about marriage makes someone one flesh. Sex is what makes someone one flesh. Now, before I go further with the text, I want to say that with any of these topics about sex, and really anything when it comes to following Jesus, and this is where purity culture really got it wrong, this is not about your past. So this isn't about, oh, you've messed up in this way sexually or sinned sexually, or you've lived, normal according to the world. Shame on you. You've messed everything up. No, this is about the future, the present. It's about the present and the future, which is all we have. And no matter what's happened in your past, Jesus' grace is there for you to cover that. And we can build flourishing, stable lives for us, our loved ones, and eventually our society by applying these things moving forward. So I really want to throw out any shame that you might feel about the past that might be a distraction to this conversation. That's not my focus here. That's not God's focus here. We want to look at the present and into the future. Certainly there's a repentance of God. I've sinned. I've lived my own way. Receiving His grace is very much sufficient for that. And saying, I want to move into your will, into your design. So back to the text, 1 Corinthians 6:16. This is Paul writing about sex, verses 12 and 20, if you want the whole context. But he references in verse 16, do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. And so back in the first century, there was lots of temple prostitutes. Temple of Aphrodite was known for this. She's a fertility goddess. There was sex at the temple with these temple prostitutes, part of first century culture. So Paul is talking about the cultural equivalent of casual sex for his day, for his culture. He's saying when you have casual sex, you've created a one flesh bond. When you've united yourself with that prostitute, with that other person, you've created one flesh. That God talks about is only to happen within marriage. He hits it again in Ephesians 5:31 when talking about marriage once more. So what does one flesh mean? I mean, one flesh is all of one person uniting with all of another person. So when you have sex, let's say interview sex, and you're having sex before your first date, and again, you might say, I've never done that, but have you had sex with someone after dating them for a few weeks, after a first date, after a few months, whatever it may be? These sexual encounters are about the physical only. It's about a physical body becoming united with another physical body. And that's what our culture's done to sex, is they've taken away the intimacy of sex that is meant to bond two people together within the covenant of marriage. The covenant of marriage says, I accept and receive all of you. I'm committed to you. I'm committed to your whole person. So God is all about the whole person, while our culture, and when I say culture, I mean Satan and his deceptions, he is all about objectifying people. So we think of rape, we think of child molestation. These are awful, awful things that all of us can look at and say, that is awful to objectify someone, for a person to use someone else for their own gain. but we go kind of up the gradient to the milder versions of objectification. Anytime you or I lust over someone, lust being I'm turning this whole person into a set of body parts, and I'm doing it in my mind, or if it's pornography, even in a more vivid way, that their body parts exist for me to consume. I will consume them like I would eat a cheeseburger from Burger King. When I'm done, I throw it in the trash, and then I move on to the next burger when I'm hungry. And it is not love. It is pure selfishness. This is for me. This is for my gratification. And there might be some transactional things happening between the two people. It might be consensual, but it doesn't mean that it has moved past I'm using someone else's body for my own gain, and I don't really care about the rest of them. Now, we can say we care about the rest of them. We might even feel it inside, those butterflies that you might feel for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, where it feels like I really care about this person. But you don't have the marriage covenant. The marriage covenant is the commitment that I care about this person, that I've made the decision that I care about this whole person, that I'm receiving all of them, all of their good traits, all of their bad traits, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Whatever comes our way, we're sticking together. And sex becomes a selfless act between two people that have embraced all of who they are. And intimacy is so much more than physical intimacy. There's emotional intimacy. There's the relational intimacy. Intimacy is the thing we're trusting someone else with in a way that we wouldn't trust anyone else with this thing. And we can experience intimacy in non-sexual ways. We can experience intimacy, not just in marriage. You can have an intimate conversation with a friend. You can have an intimate prayer service, an intimate time of worship with the Lord. But all of these things have a sacredness to them. They're intimate because we had an intimate conversation, me and my friend. And if that friend were to, let's say, record that conversation and post it on social media, that would be an extreme violation of the intimacy that you thought existed. So you kind of get the idea that intimacy is very multi-layered, and within marriage, it is the deepest expression of all of these layers of intimacy combined, where physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, becomes one of the ways that that only the covenant of marriage is built to support its weight. And it's the only place that you can truly, with integrity, say, this is not about body parts. This is not about me. This is about our relationship. Committed relationship till death do us part. Doesn't matter how this person's body changes. It doesn't matter what age or illness does to this person. I'm committed to the person. It's not that I'm obsessed with sexual body parts and the experience, and this is the person that I've been given to have that with. It is that I love this person, that I am, you could say, obsessed with this person. I'm committed to this person no matter what comes our way. And because of my love and commitment to this person as a whole person, then that is what leads me into the sexual intimacy experience with them. They're not just the set of body parts that I've made a covenant to. They're the person I've made a covenant to, and therefore their body parts are sacred and intimate to me, no matter what shape or form that they may take from day one to any number of days down the road, which is the total opposite of interview sex, of lust, of pornography, of that infatuation with body parts. So if we go down the road of the objectification, the infatuation of body parts, one thing that it does is we're selfish, as we talked about. It changes our hearts. We start consuming people, and we go from person to person to person, and there's always hurt and pain in that process for both people. And this will sound like an overstatement to some, I'm sure, but it eventually erodes away the very stability of our society. And what I mean by that is, let's talk about it from a few different angles. Clearly, we know that sexual intercourse is what creates children. It's what creates pregnancy. And that is one of the reasons God created sex. It's one of its purposes. And it is an essential purpose within it. And while there are Christians out there, particularly groups of Catholics who are against birth control altogether, and I respect their view of that. I'm not one of those people, but I will say that the addition of birth control did remove some of the natural consequences of being in such an intimate state with somebody else. So if I know that pregnancy can occur from this sexual encounter with this random person that I'm not spending the rest of my life with, then I'm going to be less inclined to engage in that. But when that natural consequence is removed, it's sort of a do whatever you want, whenever you want. And that the makeup of how we define sex and what motivates us for it is very quickly removed from this is part of building a family. This is part of a mom and a dad being together to raise kids in a stable environment. That's very self-sacrificial. You've really got to be committed to this covenant if you're going to jump into that type of commitment to raising kids. Kind of in a snap, all of a sudden, it's not about that at all. We can just skip all of that, and it becomes simply about the physical feeling that I get out of it. I absolutely understand that there are things outside of people's control. I understand with premarital sex before marriage, as well as divorces and any number of sexual circumstances, that these scenarios are sensitive. There's not a neat bow to tie on top, that there's a one size fits all. But again, looking at our present and our future for each individual, of the choices that we're going to make, the commitments we're going to make, of what design we're going to be committed to and follow and have accountability around, there is definitely a trend that we see throughout culture where kids that are raised within a mother and father marriage that are stable, they're married, the kids that are raised within a home where mom and dad are there in an intact family. This is a stat from Timothy Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage, or a quote, and then he references the statistics that children who grow up in intact families do better on a wide range of emotional, academic, and social measures. I can just say off the cuff, ask any school teacher. I'm married to one, and I know I'm married to one, and I have a mother-in-law and brother-in-law and sister-in-law and brother who are all teachers as well. Ask any teacher, and they will affirm this about the kids that they have in their class. Kids that have been raised by mom and dad in the home versus kids that have not, for any number of those scenarios. The statistics show that these children are generally, again, there's always exceptions to the rule. If this is your case, be the exception. You can do it. You can overcome this trend. But the trend is that kids that have been raised by a mom and a dad within a marriage are more likely to succeed in school. They're less likely to be involved in crime or delinquency. They're less likely to experience poverty. They're less likely to abuse drugs or alcohol. They're less likely to become pregnant as teens, and they're more likely to have stable marriages themselves as adults. And you see that where stability in marriage breeds stability in marriage, and instability in marriage, or any lack of concept of marriage, breeds more of that. If you go way, way back in my podcast feed, this was years ago, interviewed Dennis Hammond when he was a teenager. He was one of the teens that came to our park ministry and accepted Christ, and Dennis is doing really well. He's married, and just an awesome man of God. And as a teenager, I interviewed him, and he said, I'm roughly paraphrasing this, but I remember this because it was pretty eye-opening to me. This was Lansing, Michigan. Dennis said, of all of my friends, I do not know any friend that their parents are married. And he was counting, like 19 or 20 friends. Like he was kind of thinking of like his group of friends and kids from the neighborhood. Of one of those 20, their dad was around. Like their dad was part of raising them. And it's tragic to me. What's been normalized to you is what is normal. And for him, the whole concept of marriage didn't even exist. There was no concept of marriage. But that reality is real because I'm talking about the Singles in America survey. I'm talking about at Michigan State, I was in the dorm and the one of the guys at our church was an RA, and on the door of his dorm room, all the RAs had to have a box of condoms. This was in the freshman dorm, so you're 18 years old, you're getting to campus for the first time, and your RA's door has a large box of condoms on it, and it says, when these run out, go get more at the nurse's station. And it is a green light that, hey, have as much sex as you want with whoever you want. Here's the condom. It'll make sure there's no pregnancy. And it's a perpetuation of this cycle. And again, with this, back to the pendulum and to purity culture, I know this can sound like, oh, you're just being a prude. Oh, you're so old-fashioned. Oh, this is Little House on the Prairie. And I'm not trying to go focus on the family on you guys. I know that this little tiny podcast episode is not going to change the direction of our society. I'm really leaving this for you as a listener. And I've been doing Beyond the Battle groups now for 8 years, I believe. Yep, 8 years, walking men through our groups, through unwanted sexual behavior, through lots of difficult issues within marriage, and within my, in my own testimony as well. And this stuff matters. This stuff matters. And the deception from Satan is that it doesn't matter. The deception is sort of like that condom on the door of the RA door that says, hey, this is just like a handshake. This is interview sex. Just do whatever you want, do whatever feels good, and it will never catch up to you. There will be no ramifications of it. And when we get emboldened in our pride and our sin, then it's easy to say, well, I'm fine. Nothing bad has ever happened to me from this. I don't believe that. I believe that's a lie from Satan. Satan does not walk around with red horns and a pitchfork. He is called the father of lies. He is the deceiver, the accuser. He works in secret. And we need to speak truth to those lies. And so I'm just speaking this to you, whatever life stage you're in, single, divorced, or even married, if you're in a really tough spot in your marriage, right? And you're looking at pornography, you're fantasizing about other men or women, those sorts of things, that God's design for sex holds water. God's design for sex has practical implications on so many levels. There is a reason that he says sex is meant for marriage alone. And if we follow that, I am not saying you're going to have a utopian sex life. Please don't hear me saying that. That is one of the biggest things that I refute in my book, Beyond the Battle. But if we follow that, there will be fruit in our lives. Now, here's the hard part. It may not be the individual fruit that we're looking for. You will not experience as much selfish gratification, personal gratification, following God's design for sex, the rush of turning sex into a drug. I mean, sex, pornography, it does the same thing to our brain as a addictive drug, like cocaine would do. At least they've done brain scans with pornography and cocaine or heroin or one of those. And the brain reacts in a very similar way. So we porn and sex into a drug that's for ourselves, and whether it's, going to the bar to find someone to have sex with. And man, you listen to all the popular music, even from the 60s and 70s. I'm listening to this stuff like, holy cow. This is there's sort of this wholesomeness to that era. I'm like, no, there was a lot of this in the most popular music of the day, certainly today as well. So if you pursue that life and turn sex into a drug, into a rush, into a conquest, into about you, and even in date, it doesn't have to be promiscuous, like it can be in your dating relationships, and without the commitment, because the commitment is too much, the commitment is too inconvenient, the commitment is too selfless. I can tell you, you will experience more of a rush through that type of sex, just like it would if you were addicted to heroin or cocaine. You're going to have more of a rush than you would, right, if you weren't. But just like anyone can attest, and we all can attest to that being free of those substances is actually where true life is found, where true fruit is found. Because and it's not a perfect metaphor by any means, but just back to this concept of the fruit that we'll experience through God's design for sex, you're likely within marriage going to have a lot of difficulties when it comes to your sex life, because it is about a whole person, right? It's not just about body parts. There's so much more at play, and there's so much. There's so many ways we miss each other within marriage, and there's just things we don't know when we enter marriage. But going back to the stats, the fruit, the research that Tim Keller references, the fruit of this commitment isn't always for us. The fruit of the commitment is for our kids and their emotional, mental health, for their legacy of what they're passing on. The fruit is for society as a whole. It's a way of protecting people from objectification. It's a way of saying, I'm a safe person, to make the church a safe place. And I meant to mention this earlier, but the topic of abortion is often a hot button issue within Christian, conversations, and there's political components to that. And as I've studied abortion and the research and the statistics, I know that there are nuanced situations where a woman is faced with an impossible choice after being raped, for example. But I also know that the research shows, the surveys show, that the vast majority of abortions are coming from the fact that we have, as a society, completely traded in this value of sex being safe for marriage alone, where kids are raised under that structure. And we have to change the language. So instead of it being a baby, it's a fetus. And it's the only way to be able to propel the ability to have sex with whoever you want, whenever you want. And I don't want to say that's the highest value in society, but it is maybe the most frequent value in society. When you look at any TV show, any movie, again, this sounding prudish to some or reactionary, maybe you have that PTSD from the 80s and the 90s conservative, movement within the church of blotting out media. Media is the enemy. I'm not saying that, but if you pay attention, everywhere we look, the normality of sex outside of marriage is just shoved down our throats. We're just raised in it, and then all of a sudden, oops, you got pregnant. Well, the abortion, right? And the abortion just is what allows that cultural norm to continue. It's necessary. It's a necessary acceptance. And again, there will be things that are outside of a person's control. There will be things outside of your control as a woman. And if you have faced abortion, and I am not throwing any judgment on you for that. What I am saying, and I'm a father of 3 daughters. I have 3 kids. I have 3 daughters. And moving forward, for men and for women, there are things we can do when it comes to how we approach dating, how we approach sex, even the people that we associate with and the norms that they have around sex, that will highly increase or decrease the probability that we end up in a situation where we would have to face abortion or any of the other number of personal or social struggles and strains and fractures that sex before marriage can cause in our lives. So really, I just want to give you food for thought. I don't think this topic's talked about enough anymore. I write about it in my books. I'm even a little gun shy about talking about it at church, to be honest with you, because I know it's so normally accepted, and we don't want to scare people away from church. We don't want to sound legalistic, but legitimately, where God is putting this on my heart is, how do we disciple one another? How do I disciple my kids? How do I disciple my church, you, in a way that brings you closer to love? It brings you closer to the heart of God for how we respect humans, how we respect men and women, and how we don't objectify, and how we learn that love isn't about us, and we learn to give up our entitlement, and we learn the definition of love within a covenant committed relationship. And to get to that point, there's decisions that have to be made prior to that, of what my boundaries are going to be, what my priorities are going to be, what I'm going to look for in somebody that I date. Why am I dating? To be reminded that I'm not to be like this world, and there's a reason for that. God isn't trying to hold out on you. He's trying to create a safer, more secure world for everyone involved. And so think through it. I hope you look at scripture, pray about it, think about the angles, think about what you want for your future. And if you want to talk further with me, have any questions, connect with me over at patreon.com/Noah Filipiak, and I would love to interact with you more there and help walk you through any number of the difficulties that this sort of commitment can bring, giving you resources to help you along the way. And I'm right in this with you. You know, I lead Beyond the Battle groups. I lead the alumni community, but I created the alumni community because I need it. I approach the alumni community as a peer. It is peer-to-peer. I do 3 meetings a week because I know my selfish propensity to objectify. I know my selfish addictive coping mechanism propensity to look to the objectification of women in any number of layered ways. And I also know that that will destroy me. I also know that that will destroy my life and the lives of those that I love. And I can't do it alone, and you can't do it alone either. And so I guess in closing, for women listening or watching, I would love to refer you to sherecovery.com. It's a great resource for women, Christian women dealing with unwanted sexual behavior. And I've interviewed Crystal Renaud Day on this podcast before. You can check out that interview. She's the founder of sherecovery.com, where you will find groups as well as individual counseling to walk through many of these related issues. And then for guys, beyondthebattle.net. Those are the groups that I help lead, and then the free alumni community after that I lead, where we're in this together. And that's for guys 18 and over. For teens who might be listening, pick up a copy of Needed Navigation. I wrote the book specifically for you, specifically about this topic and all the others that kind of play into it when it comes to sex and pornography in our world. Grab a couple friends, read through it together, grab your youth leader or even your parent to go through Needed Navigation together. All right, with that, we'll wrap up episode 121 of the Flipside podcast. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and I will see you next time on the Flipside.
The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak is a Beyond Ministries production. Copyright Noah Filipiak. www.noahfilipiak.com. Theme music by Kyle Lake at K-Lake Music. Used with permission. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
It's time to bring me closer. There's no purgatory, cause you're in or you're out. When you see them in the clouds, you know it's going down. Raise them, raise them, raise them. They've been sleeping for some ages. Now all God's babies so confused by this hatred. Pulpit preachers shouldn't aim to be A-list. Money probably long, but short is what your days.